at 1-833-296-TALK. That's 1-833-296-8255. Or email us at themikebuckshow@gmail.com. Now, back to Mike on AM 690 and FM 94.3. The Answer.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.
Indeed. Well, excuse the expression, but we're not going to try to railroad you. But we're going to learn you about a lot about the rail. As you know, usually the second and fourth Monday of the month, we get together and talk story about about HART. And I don't know how many of you saw the really neat little blurb in the paper about helping getting involved in helping to rename the stations. I think it's an outreach, and we're pleased once again to have CEO and Executive Director Andy Robbins in the studio this morning to talk not just about that, but about how it's rolling down the track time. And more people are saying, all right, when exactly are we going to get started? And the last time you were here a couple of weeks back, we said with reasonable certainty, hey, it's coming. I mean, it's going to be the latter half of next year. And I can't believe how many people are trying to get their name on the list to get on the first ride, which I want to get right out in front of this thing and say, who's going to be on the VIP? First of all, in the first train, how many people are going to be able to make that first train, that first trip?
Oh, I don't know the exact number, Mike, but we're talking about maybe like a Kapuna day.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, I qualified, so I'm going to get right in there. That one, you know what a guy said to me a couple months ago? We were talking about something, and he said, "Hey, Mike Buck, before you keep going with this conversation, you better check with the Kapuna." I said, I did. I am Kapuna. I check with myself. It is sort of interesting, isn't it? The way things are osmosing in this project. There's all this question. First of all, let's get rid of the big elephant in the room. Another possibility that the feds may not fund this. Is that just rehashing old stories, or are we concerned about some things?
Well, we received a letter from the FTA, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago or so, and they indicate they're poised to approve our recovery plan. So I would say, yes, they are going to fund it, but they did ask us or requiring us to do a couple of things before they're ready to approve the plan.
What drove that? When you say recovery plan, that obviously means that somebody's had to, grapple with some things that aren't the way they're supposed to be, so that things need to be recovered. And by the way, let's point out that very clearly that this project is ongoing to the point where there have been many, many people cycling through HART, cycling through the bid process, the lawyers cycling through it, but it's a living animal that it has to look forward. So what is the recovery plan?
Well, the recovery plan came out of the fact that the project did overrun its budget and schedule. So around 2015, the FDA required HART to put the recovery plan together to indicate exactly what it says, how to recover the project and aim it towards the point where the budget and the schedule would be predictable.
I think what most people want to know in advance, and I would be one of them, is, okay, if I'm prepared to give up my car, if I live somewhere along the route and I'm looking at this thing, I want to make some realistic plans. Like right now I'm driving a car that I change cars every 3-4 years. Maybe it's time to think about at the end of this lease or at the end of this thing is I don't need 3 cars. I could cut it down to 2. So where can people start planning on what the schedule is going to be like and how they can fold their commute into it?
Right. Well, this is a mega project. We're building a major piece of infrastructure right across the entire island. So, it's not terribly unusual that the project runs into some difficulty.
Well, in the drawing stages, it took difficulty. Yeah, and that wasn't digging any holes. That was just, drawing.
That's it. I mean, you start digging holes, you find things and so forth. But, we're at the point now where we're much more on target. We have a risk management plan. We run simulations, and we know with much more certainty where we are, and we're aiming towards opening the first 10 miles in the last quarter of next year.
Okay, now here's where this comes in, and that is that right now there's so much confusion out there as to who's on first when it comes to who decides this is going to cost, how much the fares are going to be. We should probably reiterate again, and Andy, you've done this so well, is who is HART, what's HART's objective, and how much do they have to do with the operation and the cost of the fares, if any?
Right. Well, in 2016, there was a city charter ballot referendum, and what the public voted was that the actual operations and maintenance, the running of the trains, would go back to being the responsibility of the city. So at this point,
let's make sure that we understand that even though there's a lot of talk about federal and state, this is a city and county of Honolulu job.
It is.
Yeah.
So HART is really a special purpose project delivery company at this point. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is we planned, designed, engineered, and we're constructing the rail transit system.
Now they're saying, okay, HART, finish up the build so we can start running the train.
That's right. Yeah. And we also plan for the operations. That's another major responsibility.
You know, maybe it would help, and just based on your wide experience, Andy, in the moving a lot of people around. This is everywhere. I mean, obviously, it's hard to put a fare on something in April of this year instead of next year, the following year, when it's actually going to be ready to roll. Because don't. First of all, it's never going to be not subsidized. At least in Honolulu, we think.
Right, and that's really almost city policy now.
Yeah, almost anywhere, right?
Yeah, to set the fare so that they're fair and affordable for people.
Yeah, and probably maybe some, if anything that we've learned in previous efforts, if you don't renew things and change things and adapt things as you go along, people get in for a big shock, whether it's the minimum wage or how much a bus ride costs. Well, we haven't raised our prices for 8 years. How come? Shouldn't there be gradual increases whenever there's an increase?
Right. I mean, some localities would do that. They just have regular increases pegged to inflation.
We understand that there are actually some that, because they've been around as long as they have, and their maintenance is, pretty planned in, and some of the project is pretty reliable, that these fares don't go up a whole lot.
Yeah, and again, it's usually just a local policy. Mm-hmm. In some places, the fare is graduated, meaning that the longer you travel, the more you pay.
Sure.
Now, here, is that the right policy or not? And that's something the Rate Commission is looking at, and they'll make recommendations to the city council.
I have a note from one guy, this guy named Paul, but he sort of encapsulates what I'm thinking, and that is, it seems that right now there's a lot of things that we're looking at. I mean, they're looking at increasing at the city level, maybe rubbish pickup and some of these other things, and people are starting to think back, well, wait a minute, how's that going to, when that finally gets to the train, I bet that's going to cost a whopper. But once again, people need to know that that's not what HART's concerns are. What HART's concerns are is picking up the pieces, using the recovery plan and getting the thing built.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be any simpler than that. Obviously, it is a lot harder than when you put a piece of paper on, okay, HART finished the job. Somebody says you're always expecting to run into things when you dig holes. Are there any more big surprises coming up? Do we know?
Well, I mentioned we have our risk management program. Mm-hmm. So what we've done is we've tried our best to identify every potential risk that's remaining on this project. And we run that through a whole analysis and even a simulation program. And we can predict with good accuracy as to where the project's going to finish. And then we have something we call unallocated contingency, which is meant to take care of the unknowns.
Okay, that's exactly
what
I wanted to zero in on. Please explain. Now, this is not unique to this project. Every project has some concerns, whether it's running into the EV or whatever, or running into a government 40-inch oil line or something. I mean, right. But what about the plans that have been enacted on and are going to continue being enacted on Dillingham Boulevard? There's a lot going on in Dillingham.
That's right, but we do a lot of investigative work.
Mm-hmm.
So we do these potholing. Yeah. So people may see little local construction activities going on in Dillingham, where we're actually drilling holes just to test to see what's there. Yeah. And we've had 2 or 3 different analyses to try to understand what's underground. Because you're right, the drawings aren't always correct. Some of the pipe under the city are 90 years old.
Well, thank goodness there's that number that contractors can call. Because when you put that blade in the ground, who knows what's under there sometimes, right?
Yeah, but the other thing we've tried to do, Mike, is live within our means going forward. And this is something that my immediate predecessor put into place and I've picked up on as well. So when you do that, if there's some unknown that causes an increase in cost, then you need to find something else to save so that you keep the project in balance.
I think that people are going to be standing in line gleefully when it first takes off. I mean, right now your contractors they got to be busy at tightening up things because that initial section's pretty ready. It's getting there.
That's right. The first 10 miles of the elevated guideway are complete. Our rail operations center is complete, and we're rapidly completing the first 9 stations.
And by the way, when you say 10 miles, that's a lot. It gets 10 miles. It's kind of like far.
Want to join the conversation? Call us toll free. It's 1-833-296-TALK. That's 1-833-296-8255. Now, here's more of the Mike Buck Show on AM 690 and FM 94.3. The Answer.
It's actually I-O. Okay, so it is off to work we go. We just commented in the last section of the program. And as you know, every second Monday, it's Heartbeat. And we find out, we take the temperature and do the CPR, if you will, on the Heartbeat Show. And I got to tell you, there's this one guy, CEO and Executive Director Andy Robbins in the house. We're talking about this. I don't think I've ever told you about this in all the time we've been doing the show. There's this one guy that was working on the Pearl City part of the project forever. Every morning, I'd see the guy. This is at dark 30, getting his coffee and his banana and a bag of ice on his way to work. And he told me, I said, how many people are out there? He says, he says, I don't know, in our company there's about 40. And he said, everybody's on time. Everybody's ready to work. Everybody realizes the strength of this project. And nobody ever talks about us guys that are actually building this thing. I was impressed. This guy's just part of some subcontractor. How many of those guys are involved in this project?
Right. And they're doing a great job. We're very, very proud of them. Yeah. I
mean, this guy's driving from Hawaii Kai out to Pearl City every day. And he says the good part about it is there's no traffic on my way out there. And when I'm coming back in, I get off at 3:15. That's a little bit better. He said, but everybody that's on that project talks about what a great thing it is and how it's going to provide a lot of opportunity. We don't hear that enough. You guys need to hear that more, don't you?
Yeah, I think that kind of feedback is really important. And we mentioned Kupuna Day for one of the first rides. The other thing we want to do is have Contractors and Laborers Day. So everyone that was involved
the fruit and the pudding.
in building this project, we want to get them on for one of the first rides for sure.
I think we need a T-shirt. We're T-shirt freaks here. I'm part of the rail. I built the rail. But I really do think that some of us do plan ahead more than others. I'm kind of an impulsive. I'm an alpha. I know I'm impulsive. But I do know people that have planned when they're going to have a baby. They plan, when they're going to sell their home because they want their kids to go to school until a certain time. And all of those that are doing that, there's a lot of them that are decided, okay, if a new car costs you $1,200, $1,500 or more a month, plus fuel, why wouldn't you just say, let's be smart, let's do this? So how many people are waiting in line to get that information? I would imagine a lot. Especially like I said before, even though it's not in your purview, the fare.
Yeah. That's right.
And what it's going to do besides that. So tell us how the rail project is going to work in with the existing mass transit that we have.
Well, the whole idea is to be a multimodal system, so rail and bus working together, but also other modes of transportation as well. So, for example, the Beaky bike.
Sure.
People have to get to and from the rail stations, for example. So you could either take a bus, maybe ride a bike, be dropped off, use one of the ride sharing.
By the way, you're talking about the card. The Beaky's a monthly deal is a pretty good deal.
It's a good deal.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, and we want to make it convenient for people. So, if you have your own bike, there'll be bike racks on the car, for example. So I was hearing from somebody recently who lives in Manoa, and he says he works at Schofield.
Mm-hmm. There you
and
go.
He's planning to ride his bike down to the Ala Moana station, get on the rail, and get out there, and then get on his bike.
There's another story this morning in the press, and I probably should have started out with it. That we're starting to look into this story about how a rideshare car company is going to get into business, and they're going to be able to apply for and receive parking, on-street parking for their vehicles. That means that the city is grappling with the fact that, all right, there's all these modalities that you talk about, and they have to work together. And there's a lot of people already complaining, well, wait a minute, how are you giving a private operation my parking stall? Wouldn't that be yet another reason to consider one less car in the family? Because even if you think about parking in a stall, there are not going to be many stalls around by the time you get there.
Yeah, and, some people will want to drive, park and ride. Yeah. But, we also want to make it convenient for people to take a bus or some other mode where they don't need the car at all.
Yeah, one guy, this got asked earlier by Thomas. I wanted to know, are all of the trains going to have Wi-Fi? I think we've covered that before. You're going to do everything you can in the stations and on the trains so that people can do something while they're riding.
That's right. We are working on a Wi-Fi plan for the trains. And, the longest ride will be 42 minutes from end to end, but most people will probably
a lot of people in 42 minutes, so Andy can get a bunch of emails done or something.
Done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I already actually know one guy who's an attorney in Hawaii Kai who keeps a car at his office in downtown Honolulu, but he rides a bus to and from work because it's convenient. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about also, once again, when we talk about convenience, the buses have an overnight schedule and everything has an overnight schedule. At this point in time, what does it look like the normal operating hours of the rail will be?
Yeah, I think we're planning to open around 4 in the morning and stay open till after midnight. So probably until 1 in the morning. Yeah,
very similar to the buses.
Yeah, we do need a down period for maintenance, but we recognize that the morning peak starts very early here, and we want to make it as convenient as possible.
What I think is interesting, there are some systems, and you know them more than I do, that are 24/7. And however, they're far and few between. In the big cities, almost everybody knows you can't run a system, and you can't keep the expense at a reasonable mark unless you give people and equipment some time off.
Yeah, I mean, even a big city like London, England, did not have 24-hour service on the underground. New York does because they had the foresight to build 3 tracks. So I saw that, and part of Chicago is the same way. But here's the interesting thing: all of these things have been addressed everywhere else. Our people have no idea how much these systems mean to a property. They say that it takes a long time, as much as a generation. What's your experience with that? You've been involved in many of these projects. Doesn't it take a while for the system to burn in so that regular folks use it? Yeah, I think people have to adjust to something new, and once we start running, of course we're going to start with this the first 10 miles. So that's not the full system. So I think people have to see if that's useful to them, convenient for them. And then once we phase in the full system, then they can really start to make the adjustments in their lives and benefit from this new mode of transportation. When all is said and done, we've had a couple of comments about, the recovery plan. And they're critical. I mean, one says, why didn't they get this right in the first place? Haven't there been enough examples of metro mass transit all over the country and all over the world that we can learn from? Actually, isn't that exactly what HART is doing, bringing some of the experience that other people have done in other places, like you, into existence? Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think everybody that's involved. Right, and what I've tried to do over the last 2 years is bring in really critical resources with expertise that we need here. I think what is overwhelmingly, abundantly clear to me is that people that bemoan or decry the amount of money some people get for doing some of these jobs. How many people do you have to tell in the very beginning, hey, listen, this is a slippery slope we got here. We need you, but, be prepared to have, WD-40 on the wheels of your desk because people have been cycling through here because we have had a lot of times when things got out of hand and there had to be some changes made. We have a couple of folks that have a lot of experience in starting up a system like this, and in some cases I've had to attract them from the wherever. East Coast. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, these people need an answer about how long is this appointment going to be and what's going to happen at the end of it. And if you're in the middle of your career, and you want to stay in the rail transit field, let's say, you may not want to come to Hawaii for one project because we don't necessarily have a
may not.
Follow-on.
You're being kind. I want to know what's the track record of all my predecessors. We have the same thing happening in a lot of areas. It's Heartbeat. Every couple of weeks we get together. Today, once again, proud to have Andy Robbins in with us. He's the executive director and the CEO of the project.
You're on the road again, so buckle up and join us hands-free. It's 1-833-296-TALK. That's 1-833-296-8255. It's the home of Hawaii's award-winning Mike Buck Show on AM 690 and FM 94.3. The Answer.
Exactly. That's my early morning mentry. La Sidenia indeed. Welcome back. It's the Heartbeat. Every couple of weeks we get together and talk rail. And things are folding into pretty good shape. As CEO and he does everything. He paints the lines on the road. He does everything. Andy Robbins is here, and we're talking about it. And it's sort of interesting thing to me is the difference when all of a sudden people in the private sector realize that there's a real good reason why they should get involved in a project. And I know that in many cases, some of that private partnership stuff happens early in the piece. I'm not sure that was the case here as much, but explain to people, if you don't mind, Andy, a little bit about what P3 is and maybe what sort of direction we're going off there, and what's that going to mean for people as far as development and concessions be made to people to get this project finished.
Yes, well, P3 has become something of a generic term, a public-private partnership, but in the context of developing infrastructure, really what it is to be specific, design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Mm-hmm. So it's really looking at
in chunks. Aren't a lot of these people working with just a specific little chunk of the business?
Well, it could, it's a big project like this, sure. Whether it's a rail project or a bridge or a highway, this type of project delivery method, and that's really what it is project delivery.
That's the point I was trying to get to. Right now, we were going along a certain way of getting the thing built, and what it looks like to some people, including me, is okay. That's not working out as well. We want to have this bridge guy come in and give us a quote on the remaining bridges or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, there's work that's still available.
Well, traditionally on a project like this, in the United States especially, we would have deployed design, bid, build. And we have in certain cases on this project where government basically finds somebody to design the project, and then you put the specs together, and you put that out for bid, and a contractor would be responsible to use that design and then build something. And that puts the interface responsibility between the designer and the builder and everybody else kind of squarely on the public sector. So the next
that's
phase,
you. That's in that case, what's happening? All of this pressure is going to funnel to arts desks.
Yeah. So then, for the airport segment, we switched to design, build, project delivery. So now the design and the construction is the responsibility of a private sector entity. And I have to say that project is running much, much better than
I was going to say. When it's a private sector, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a private company. It could be a stock-held company. It could be a lot of things. So they have their way of measuring how much involvement they can do and how much it's going to cost. And number one, how to protect their ability to have a profit and yet stay within the budget.
Yeah, and the one thing we're talking about without saying it is risk. There's this issue of risk, because you try to build a project like this, you have risk on the project. And what we're trying to do is balance the risk between public sector and private sector so that the party that's best able to manage that risk is taking the risk and mitigating the risk.
Are there some companies and some people that look for this kind of opportunity, that they just know what they're doing, and that doesn't matter whether they're here in Singapore and San Francisco or Chicago or L.A.?
That's right. And in this P3 field, especially for infrastructure, there are international companies now that have kind of modeled their business after taking care of looking at these projects as a long-term asset. So not just to build it, but to manage the project over the long term and operate, maintain it according to a set of performance standards.
It's interesting you say that, because somebody mentioned earlier, after you guys were here the last time, sometimes they'll see a truck on this project and they've never heard of the company. Why isn't a local company being hired? The obvious answer, and you can please explain that, is that in the perfect world, everybody would love to have the local contractors come in and take the bids and do the work. But isn't it true that some of the local contractors, as well intended as they may be, are not experienced in this particular field enough?
Right. So, for example, the elevated guideway, the structures that we're deploying on this project, they're what's called segmental bridge construction.
Segmental bridge construction. Oh, boy.
So it's like segments,
Yeah.
maybe 5-6 foot segments that are cast in a yard.
Yeah.
And then they're brought to site and they're
And
erected.
assembled. Yeah,
and
erected.
it's a very particular technology that only some companies have that.
And by the way, if I was
knowledge.
that company that had that, I wouldn't release it. I'm saying I build them, you inspect them.
I
But
think the technology was invented in France, but it's now spread around the world. It's used quite frequently. But, we're always using local companies as well.
Sure.
That's another partnership is between national, international firms and local firms.
Well, if you go back to what I was saying earlier, this guy that I used to see every morning was from a local concrete company. And he says he can't believe the number of people that are out there that come from different places that really have a good grip on, and the local companies learn a lot from these guys as they come in.
Right, and vice versa. So,
Yeah, of course.
The national and international firms are not going to want to come here just on their own. They're always going to want to partner with a local company to get the local expertise.
Well, one would certainly say specifically that what you need to do is that a local company has really got to know, all right, you're going to be in, this is design and build that you're looking for. You better be competitive because it does get pretty competitive, doesn't it, with pricing and bidding and all that stuff.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so what does it look like for the P3, the guy that's doing all the work?
Well, April 12th, which just passed, was a critical day for us because that's when submittals were due from the private sector for our P3 initiative. So we did receive submittals on that date, and the process is moving forward now. And what that entails is evaluating the submittals that we received.
Are some of these after the initial project? I mean, we're talking about after the 10 miles?
Yeah, well, a lot of the P3 in our case is focused on developing city center, which is the last major piece
at the moment,
that we have to put together. But then we've also included the actual operations and maintenance for the entire system as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that want to know, and they phrase their questions different ways about the extension. I mean, we already know about the first 10 miles. What about the second? So that means that, where are we with regards to we're stopped at Middle Street? Do we just say that that's where it's going to be right now, or that it's going to be different?
The first 10 miles gets us to Aloha Stadium, starting in East Kapolei.
Right.
We go to Aloha Stadium. That's the piece that we're intending to open next year. And we're constructing the next 5 miles or so.
The next 5 miles.
That's through past Pearl Harbor,
right.
through the airport area, and that gets us to Middle Street. Mm-hmm. And that should be all completed by 2022, and after a series of tests that we need to run.
Open,
that will
similar to what's been happening, coming at the end of next year.
Right. So around 2023, we expect to open that segment. So now you'll be able to get all the way from East Kapolei to Middle Street.
Yeah, but
and then we'll be under construction with the.
That's what my question was. Then you're going to be under construction with the rest of it. Mm-hmm. I think that the most difficult thing that I, or a listener, or somebody that's not in your business, we don't think 3 years away. We think today. And isn't that the dilemma? The teaching us has got to be a little bit more intense. That's why we do programs like this, to let people know. And by the way, this is a sponsored program. I mean, we're doing this because HART feels the initiative of needing to get out there and talk to you folks that are commuting on a regular basis on how this project works. And I think that maybe it would also be sort of gratifying if people knew how to wind their way to get through to somebody at HART and ask questions. And I do know that you have a lot of interest, that the website gets lit up. How much traffic is being directed there, and what sort of an experience would a newbie have of going to the website and learning something?
Well, we do have our website, and we do get quite a bit of traffic on the website. We post a lot of information there. If you really search through the website, you'll find a lot of information.
I hope teachers are doing that.
Yeah. And then we have a hotline. If you need to contact us, you can call the hotline. We get a lot of inquiries from people saying, hey, what are you doing on Cam Highway?
Right.
What are you doing on Farrington Highway? Questions like that. Or if they see some issue, they want to communicate with us. And I think we do a pretty good job following through on all of those requests.
I know if there was a way to do this in any different way, you would have done it differently. But I happen to know from some Pearl City people that they were calling on a regular basis because they were kind of impacted. I mean, for a long time, traffic was, it's still not perfect, but I mean, it was pretty bad. And the ones that were complaining were fast food places, restaurant places that had to wait and hopefully somebody could get into their place. But aren't some of these very same people sort of now saying, okay, well, when it's going to be finished so we can plan to, invest more money in attracting these people to get off of that station or this station?
Right. Yeah. So we have a program, I think we call it Dine on the Line.
Shop and dine. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Right. Right. So we're trying to make people aware that, these businesses are along the line. And
you're not going to be able to bring your cart of Costco stuff. But a lot of people are going to change from what I understand. This one lady called up last time you guys were here after you left and said, the interesting thing is we buy in bulk, but we don't necessarily want to buy in bulk because we waste a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. So what it's going to do is going to teach people to be more prudent in going to these little stores, not with a whole bunch, but just bringing home something every day.
Right, and I had my own experience having lived in Hong Kong with no car, and you go out to the local shops and you get what you need on a daily basis.
Well, I can remember living when I was living in Sydney. There's a milk bar, which is a sandwich place, and there's a butcher, and there's a fish guy, and there's a little guy, and all of those guys kind of went away to big supermarkets in our country. But from what I understand now, in urban areas or in city areas, they're going back to the concept of the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker because it's convenient.
Got a comment? Think you've got the answer? Call now at 1-833-296-TALK. That's 1-833-296-8255. And here's more Mike Buck on AM 690 and FM 94.3. The Answer.
Yep, it's a happy Magnum Monday and a Hawaii 5-0 Friday. What's going to happen tonight? You're going to have to figure it out your own. Okay, so it's 7:51. If you'd like to join the conversation, it's easy. The number is 1-833-296-TALK. That's 1-833-296-8255. Andy Robbins is here. We're talking HART. Every couple of weeks we get together and spread the word about what's happening with this project. It's getting a lot closer now. It's and one of the things we're trying to address in the last segment is that you and I are wondering what we're having for lunch today. And guys that work in the HART building say, well, what's for lunch in 3 years? And that's a mentality, and I think, Andy, it's a mentality that it takes a while developing. And you certainly did it long enough in your career. Is there a secret? How do you get your mindset to be able to think that far down the road and try to figure out what the variables are going to be?
Well, I think in the business of developing these major infrastructure projects, 3 years is a pretty short time.
Exactly.
And I realize, for the public.
Not for me.
Yeah, for the public, it's not. And that's one of the reasons we're looking to, in some ways, speed up the project because we know the project's behind schedule.
Is it typical that some of them will open up a section like we're doing just to get the ball rolling? Does that happen? Or yeah.
That happens quite frequently. And I think it's, it's great for the public, right, to start understanding what the benefits are, to actually start riding. But it's also really important for us from a project management standpoint because there's hundreds of things we need to do to make sure that we can safely put passengers on the train.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah. Didn't we just see that at the airport? I mean, right now there's a few airlines looking at adding Hawaii to their routes. Southwestern was one, and there's been a couple of other ones. The big Flying Turtle came in from Japan, empty. And they have to make a lot of track. I mean, isn't that the same deal?
Right. So the public will see, for example, out in Eva, the guy, it looks like it's finished.
Yeah.
And they'll see trains running, but there won't be any passengers on the train because we're going through a series of tests.
Hey, but you know what? I got to tell you something, and not just because you're sitting here. It's pretty. I mean, I've seen it a couple times, and now you think, well, at least it's nice looking, and when you take a look at the finished project, there's going to be the naysayers, of course, but it really does look like that's going to work. That has to work.
Well, I think a lot of people were envisioning like a Nimitz Viaduct type situation.
Yep.
And that's not the case with the rail. The guideway, the elevated structure is less than 25 foot wide. So, and that's 2 lanes, so we can run trains in both directions. within that 25-foot width. We don't need the 100-foot wide.
Yeah, that's another
viaduct.
thing. A lot of these things that you see are older, are way before space was even a concern. You mentioned something earlier, and it would bear repeating. In an ideal world, if they're going to build a new city, they're going to build new mass transit. What were some of the difficulties in Hawaii that should have been realized before the project started? Meaning, like, how much business interruption is there going to be? How much workers are going to take? And how can we work on a basis where we need to ram the thing through, but we also can't be paying triple overtime? We can't work 24 hours a day.
Right. Well, some cities, especially overseas, they'll build a system like this before the city develops. Which means the
China's been doing that a lot, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So the construction's easier and less expensive, and then the city grows up around it. We're doing it where we have a built-up city already, and that's complicated. So I think land acquisition, all the relocation of all the utilities, whether it's water, sewer, electric, that is such a huge effort that we had to undertake as HART. And people may not associate all of that with the rail project.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't,
And we're not only that, but I think we're contributing to the resiliency of the city because, as I mentioned earlier, some of the water pipe, for example, is 90 years old.
Yeah.
And when we move it, we don't put the 90-year-old pipe back.
Hey, by the way, let's make that really clear because I use as sort of a byline in my program that there's a water main break every 8 minutes in Honolulu. I mean, it's just, it happens. And I do know that when you're working around these things, that if you leave well enough alone, they're okay. But you're not going to open up a pipe and move a pipe and then say, okay, well, just stick some super glue in there and let's move. So some of this stuff you're actually anticipating replacing as you go.
That's right. And we work very closely with the Board of Water Supply, and they're very adamant on protecting their system, which is good.
Well, if you take a look, let's take a look at this. Let's say that we open up Dillingham and we find telephone, cable, gas, water, everything, right?
It's all there.
Yeah. And then in comes you guys and say, okay, we're going to move all this stuff around because look what we're going to put in here.
That is a challenge, and we work very closely with each one of those entities to make sure that we're improving the situation and not being detrimental to.
Okay, one thing like you said, and I hope this sticks with people. I think if they learn one thing today, I think that we know that China is developing something like 10, 20 million people cities. This is what they're doing. And they have the opportunity of saying, okay, here's what this city's going to look like. Here's where the transit's going to be. Here's the opportunities, landlords. Here's the opportunity, developers. How are you doing with attracting developers that are willing to work with housing and the other stuff, but they want to try to get some help to make it work for them?
I think you're speaking about transit-oriented development.
TOD, all of that stuff that we hear about. Yep.
Right. So we're supporting the city in those efforts and the state as well. They have tremendous plans, essentially for every one of the rail stations, and we're working very closely with them to try to turn those plans into reality.
One of the biggest questions that always comes up that says, please ask Andy when you get a chance to talk about noise. Because if I'm going to be wanting to have a business, or if I want to do something along this corridor, what's it going to sound like? Is there any way to know this?
Yes, there is. And we have specs that limit the amount of noise emission that the train can make. And if you take a look at our elevated guideway, you'll see continuous sound walls built into the structure. So I think that's very important.
From what I understand, and there's whole areas of opportunity, or there's companies all over the world that are specializing in materials that help people live with each other, whether it's a train track you're talking about or a new freeway or new anything.
Right. So when I used to be in a company that made trains, and there are technologies that you incorporate into the trains, not only for the steel wheel on steel rail, but just the noise from the motors, for example.
Sure.
There are ways to control that.
Yeah, and by the way, is the electric motor generally, or the electric system generally quieter than the old steam engines or the old locomotives?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know that people that have had that experience say, man, it can't be that bad.
Yeah, but, we have to treat noise emissions as a system. It's not just the train, but it's the train on the guideway coming into the station, and so we look at it from that standpoint.
Well, isn't there also things, Andy, like noise around stations? I mean, there's people.
There's ambient noise.
Yeah,
right? We're
always,
not in a pristine environment. We're in a city.
Okay, next time we get together, we hope you're going to be able to spend a little bit of time on parking and some of the other concerns that people have so that they can make that trip. You say, if I ride a bike from my home to my rail stop, I take the bike to work with me if I want to, or I figure out a way to lock it up where I am and then come home and ride it back. Hopefully some of that will not depend on rain and stuff. And I know that you hear that. In an ideal world, you'll be able to get to and from this thing, but on a rainy day, and we have a few of those in Hawaii, right? Thanks a lot. And if people do want to go to the web, where can I get general information?
www.honolulutransit.org.
Honolulutransit.org. Thanks, Eddie.